I do remember.
We had State Farm, and we still have them down here. We switched from USAA back to State Farm because USAA won't cover down here. And they even have a limited liability company.
Okay, I'd
They
like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the November meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Board of Adjustment. I'll start with roll call. Down to my left, Bill.
Liam Prostine.
Man.
Jan Conacy, here.
Barry Brandt.
Fred Townsend, solicitor, or excuse me, attorney for the board.
Edith Heron.
Mark Saunders.
Okay, we have a full board here today. Thank you.
I have a solicitor here also.
This afternoon, the Board of Adjustment has 2 cases on the calendar. Before we get to the cases, we have some board matters that we need to attend to. They will be brief. These matters are that we need to appoint a chairman, a vice chairman, and a secretary for the Board of Adjustment. In addition, we need to approve the minutes from September and October. We do not have the August minutes to approve. So I'm going to open it up to the board right now, or to Fred, to conduct the appointment of the officers.
So regarding the appointment of officers, I would ask if there are any motions to fill the position of board chairman.
I would like to move that Barry Brandt fill the position of board chairman. I tried to find a process for officers, and I really couldn't.
For appointing officers?
Well, yeah, I didn't know whether, because so anyway, so
Well-
I would nominate Barry.
So this board will vote on the appointment of officers, and we're going to start with the chairperson. Do we have a second?
I second.
All right, we have a second. Before we vote, I'll ask if there are any other motions to appoint a competing individual to the position. Okay, with that, I think a show of hands would be sufficient. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So it's unanimous.
Okay.
Mr. Brandt, congratulations.
Thank
or
you.
Whatever the appropriate descriptor is.
Thank you.
The next position is vice chair, and while the intent here is to appoint both a vice chair and a secretary today, we're not under an obligation to do it. If it's not been something that you feel strongly about and would like to consider filling either of those positions at a later date, as a group, you can reserve those decisions until later. But for the time being, or at this point, I'll just ask if there is a motion to appoint the vice chair.
Well, I'd make a motion that I'd nominate Jan if she would accept it.
I would second that.
I guess I'll accept it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Being the, I won't say oldest, the longest time member
Well,
of Barry.
Thank you again.
Are there any other
This-
motions for vice chair? Any ideas? No? Okay, so then, once again, all in favor signify by saying aye to appoint Jan Conacy as
Aye.
vice
Aye.
chair.
Aye.
Okay, that was unanimous.
And I just had a question about secretary. Is Ann not the board secretary, or that was a little confusing
She's
to
the
me?
town clerk, and she performs the responsibilities in effect, but she is technically not the secretary to
Secretary.
the board.
What does the board secretary do?
Right, I was like,
I was trying to find a list of the responsibilities. I assumed I knew what the chair did and vice chair, but I could not find a description.
Well, the secretary is responsible for the minutes and signing documents which evidence the actions taken of the board on occasion. Staff, I think, prepares the minutes, but the secretary might receive the minutes first and have a chance to edit them or make suggestions prior to the board.
who used to be secretary? Because I don't remember having a secretary before.
Mary,
I thought it was Walt.
was it Walt?
Oh, was it Walt?
I
Oh,
thought it was
okay.
Walt.
May I suggest that we hold this till perhaps the next meeting, since so many of us are somewhat new, and we're
Okay.
kind of feeling our way a little bit, although we're well-versed in what we're supposed to be doing. But in terms of procedure, we might be a little bit new at this, so.
Is that acceptable to everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll defer that then.
All right, we'll leave that on the agenda for
Okay.
next time.
And Joe, excuse me if I say Ann, because I put my notes together for Ann. So Joe, the meeting and public notice is properly posted, and do we receive any correspondence? Okay. Ann has been keeping us up to date with the updated on the website with all of the correspondence, including there were some late additions as recent, I think it's Sunday morning. So did everyone get a chance to review? Okay, that correspondence, okay. Did everyone get a chance to review the September and October minutes?
So with regard to the minutes, some of you were not present for that meeting. However, we've got a pretty big shakeup in the membership of the board, and we really can't adopt the minutes without some cooperation from other members. So if you're not uncomfortable, I would ask you to vote to adopt the minutes, and if you wish to state on the record that you're doing so out of an administrative duty to the board, that would be, I think, sufficient to make it clear that you're voting for the minutes despite not having been present. Any objection to that?
No objection from me.
So you want to ask?
Yeah, may I get a motion to approve the September 2022 minutes of the Board of Adjustment?
So moved.
Does it have to be someone who was in attendance making the motion?
There isn't enough of us in attendance to.
I will second that.
I don't think it has to be, no.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And for the October 2022 meeting,
Move that we accept the minutes as written?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so both, they're approved.
And I need to ask Fred, do we need to make that parenthetical statement if we were not in attendance to the September, for instance, or?
I think it's clear that a number of you were not present or part of the board when those meetings took place, so I
Okay.
think that's fine.
Nothing else needs to be said or done, okay? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. Is there any old business we need to take care of today? At this point? No? Okay. And did everyone get a chance to review the letters submitted? I think I asked that. I think everyone did, okay. And I'm going to bring this up again. At the August meeting, the board approved the addition of application changes encouraging photographs to be submitted. Has the application, I'll ask this to Matt and Glenn, has the application been updated? Because I noticed today's two cases are you both used the old template. You know, if we're ready, like moving along with that.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I'd have to talk to Ann to see
Okay.
what our status of the application is.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, now let's move on to the most important work today, which are two variance requests. In the first case, the applicant is seeking a variance on lot coverage. In the second case, variance case, the applicant is seeking relief from height, and as the application says, floor area FAR ratio FAR requirements. Both cases are area variances and not use cases. Okay, now this part's important for us to all to understand. Under Delaware law, an applicant for an area variance must prove that the requirements create an exceptional practical difficulty. To determine whether the exceptional practical difficulty exists, the board must weigh the following four factors: the nature of the zone where the property lies, the character and use of the immediate vicinity, whether the removal of the restrictions on the applicant's property would seriously affect the neighboring properties and their uses, and finally, whether the removal of the restriction would create an exceptional practical difficulty for the owner in relation to the owner's efforts to make normal improvements to the properties. That's what the board will be weighing today when we listen to both of the cases. This standard is satisfied only when the difficulties alleged by the owner are practical rather than theoretical and exceptional rather than routine. Before we proceed to the two cases, and I want to do a little bit of clerical work here. We have two cases. The first one's going to be on Virginia Avenue. But I do want to ask the building inspector and the applicant for 229 Hickman Street, I guess a question about the inspector's report versus the application. In other words, if we need to defer this, we would let the 229 people, you know, not stick around. So let's talk about that for a few minutes before we get there. The issue I see, and thank you, Jan, for calling it out, is that the application says height and FAR, and the building inspector's report says height with future variance requests for FAR, at least FAR. So I wanted to ask, and before I have the homeowners come up for 229, they can stay where they're seated right now. So I want to go over that first. Matt, are you okay to proceed? And I'm going to ask the applicants.
Thank you, Chair. I did that because there's some more information that's going to be required for that. There is a shed on the property that I do not have any record of as far as inspections to prove the height. So I cannot tell if that's additional floor area ratio at this time. Looking through this, it was my original thought that the applicant could take advantage of the basement credit, that if you, I'm not quite sure the code nut section off the top of my head, but there is a 1,000 square foot basement credit that can be applied to this if the original house was built to a 50% floor area ratio at the time of its construction. The house is maybe a year and a half old to 2 years old. So I do not have an answer for that at this time. The documents provided to me was not enough to calculate that and to see other potential variances that might be needed through this variance for additional permitting, I should say.
Okay. And are the applicants or the homeowners here for, do you want to continue forward with height only, or?
So we did have the floor to area ratio
That's what I'm thinking.
inspected, and we did have a final inspection on the shed. But I don't know why that record didn't exist. But we are.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Do you mind,
Speaking in for the record, just so we have the recording.
so we haven't opened the public hearing yet. This is a preliminary matter at this point, but in order for you to be audible to anyone who wants to watch this video or rest in the room, it would be helpful for you to speak into the microphone.
And your name, sir?
Dylan Crew.
Okay.
So we did have the final inspection for the shed. I think that it's Matt, right? I just wanna, he recommended that we apply for the floor to area ratio exception as well, because as soon as we lift the residence, we would be over. But I think the extra square footage would be utility and duct space anyways, so we would actually be able to comply with floor to area ratio, and the only thing that we would be encroaching on would be the maximum building height.
So are you okay proceeding with only the variance request for height?
Yes, sir, correct.
Okay. Okay, so they want to, I'm not opening the case up yet.
Okay.
It's just basically, please
We're okay
stay
to
until
proceed.
when we get done Virginia Avenue. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to get that clarified because I saw the wording. Okay. So let's move on to our first case. Will the representations for case 0922-08 Virginia Avenue please come forward and have a seat?
Right there, at the table. Our practice is to establish a record, so I'm gonna ask you your name and address, and then I'm gonna swear you in. Then we're gonna turn our attention elsewhere and come back to you. Okay, so name and address, please.
Stephen Pritzios, address 8704 Winthrop Drive, Alexandria, Virginia, 22308.
Mr. Pritzios, do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. So going, starting this, our first case today is case 0922-08 for the properties located at 10A, 10B, 12C, and 12D Virginia Avenue. These properties are in the R2 residential district. The applicant is seeking relief from zoning code 270-21C1 natural area, floor area ratio, and lot coverage, and 270-04 definitions. And as Mr. Townsend said, everyone who chooses to speak today will be required to give their testimony under oath. And I'm going to ask Mr. Townsend to administer those oaths, always taking care of you. And we do not have a court reporter here today. That's why we want everyone speaking into the microphone in case we need to create transcripts at a later date. Please speak into the microphone. Keep your voices up. Okay. And will there be anyone here today to speak for or against the Virginia Avenue case?
Raise your hand.
Just raise your hand at this point. Okay, thank you. All right. You will have the opportunity to do this before the board makes its decision. Second, our rules require that the owners of the property within 200 feet of the property in question get notice of the variance request. And Joe, I typically ask Ann this question, if all property owners within, I don't know if we have a way of verifying that today, so we're going to pass over that. And again, we will, after we let the public speak, the board will close the public speaking point, and then the board will deliberate on each case. So first, I'd like to ask to have a presentation from the city on Virginia Avenue.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the new members. Before you today is case number 0922-08. The location for this application is 10A and B and 12C and D Virginia Avenue. The applicant is Dino Pritzios. He is the HOA president, the Virginia Square Townhouse Association, address listed as 1520 Dunsler Pond, York, PA 17403. The owners are as follows: 10A, Diane Benson; 10B, Faye Gold; 10C and 12C and 12D, Dino and Evelyn Pritzios. The subject of today is the applicants seek relief from the following: 270-21 natural area, floor area ratio, and lot coverage, and 270-04 definitions is a relevant code section. The nature of the request is as follows. The applicant, Mr. Dino Pritzios, acting as the representative in his capacity as president of the Virginia Square Townhouse Association, is seeking a variance to 270-21 natural area, floor area ratio, and lot coverage to allow the reconstruction of 2 existing decks and the placement of 2 new decks at the front of the property. The property is located at 10 and 12 Virginia Avenue, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, 19971, and is situated in the R2 General Residential District. The property is listed in Sussex County records as tax map number 334-14.14-20.00. The parcel is a rectangular shaped lot with an area of approximately 10,000 square feet. Background information. The main structure was built under a valid building permit in 1981. At the time, there was no natural area requirement. The property remains in state with minimal natural area. The 2 existing decks were code compliant at the time of installation. However, the decks are no longer code compliant in that the construction does not conform to current Americans with Disabilities Act ADA compliance standards. The applicants wish to provide building code and ADA compliant decks at the front of each of the 4 units. The applicant is seeking relief from the following ordinances: 270-21 natural area, floor area ratio, and lot coverage. A, natural area. In R1, S, R1, and R2 districts, a minimum of 50% of the gross lot area and 50% of the front yard setback area of every building lot shall remain as natural area as defined in 270-4. And in the 270-4 definitions, natural area is defined as the following: that portion of the gross lot area that is dedicated to either trees, grass, flowers, bushes, other plantings, and/or mulched areas. For the purposes of calculating natural area, mulched areas shall be limited to the use of vegetative ground covers and shall not include the use of clamshells, decorative stone, or other similar hard materials. The proposed addition of the 2 non-existing decks would not add any additional coverage to the already over-covered lot, because the new construction would be replacing existing stone coverage with a new wooden structure. Because the type of coverage is not being replaced in kind, the proposed construction needs a variance. The conclusion is that the two existing decks are non-conforming structures under 270-47A. Replacing one non-conforming lot coverage, rock, to another form of lot coverage, wooden decking, is not a permissible change according to the City of Rehoboth Beach zoning ordinance. Therefore, a variance is required for the placement of the proposed and reconditioned decks. Should the board grant the approval, the applicants shall obtain the necessary building permits to proceed with the construction and follow all requirements determined by building and licensing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to do questions for the building inspector. I'm going to ask some initial questions. Matt, are there any needs for variances on the existing decks at 10A and 10D today?
I do not believe so. They are requesting to increase the size of those decks to meet ADA compliance, but the coverage that exists already for those decks is stone coverage.
Structure.
So it's a this for that, if you will.
Okay. As far as replacement material, this might be nitpicking, but if you replaced it, are we replacing it with wood to wood or wood to the vinyl product? Do we know that?
I would have to see what the application came in as, and maybe the applicant can answer that
Okay.
Upon his time.
Okay. Now, if they were to rebuild it without a deck, some type of ADA compliant structure, would they need a variance? And it's 100% coverage. If there was some way to build an ADA compliant, not a deck, would it still a variance be needed?
It would.
Yeah, okay. All right. And again, the trigger for the variance, the change in material is what caused the trigger. Okay.
It is a change in material and as well as a change in use.
Change in use. Okay. All right. That's all the questions I had. Anyone?
What's the change in use?
So
still
it's hardscaping going to a deck. So a deck is a patio, is a usable area.
So my understanding is on the 2N units, there's existing decks
Correct.
or existing porches or whatever you want to call it, a space. And they need to be ADA compliant. And I guess, do they need to be repaired or are they in perfect condition the way they are now?
They are in deteriorating condition, and they do not meet ADA compliance standards today.
So replacing those two with a wooden deck or whatever that's ADA compliant, that's what they're asking for the 2 end units, correct?
Correct.
The 2 middle units have nothing there.
Correct. Gravel coverage, right?
Gravel. And they're asking for decks there as well.
So they're asking
ADA.
for decks there as well. And what's the hardship that requires something to be added that's not there? Or
They'll speak to that.
they'll
Yeah.
speak to that,
Okay.
okay, all right. Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that it's just the 2 that are existing that need to be repaired, replaced to make them ADA compliant. Okay, got it, thanks.
How much larger will the end decks be than the existing decks? I know you said they have to be ADA compliant, but how much larger will that make them?
I believe they're going for a minimal increase, but as far as coming out from the face of the structure, going for a minimal increase, but they're increasing the length, the width of the structure. That's correct.
Do you know by how much?
Yeah.
I would guesstimate approximately maybe 50 square feet or 50 feet across the front. So if we imagine, and the numbers, I could certainly refer to my documentation here, but if we imagine the decks to be, say, 20 feet across right now, you'd be increasing by 40 feet with the addition of those 2 interior decks.
Well, can I ask on your question?
yeah, sure.
Bill? So I thought, I'm not counting the interior decks. They don't exist, so they're not replacing something that doesn't exist. The 2 end decks currently exist. They obviously need to be replaced. So what size are they now, and what size will they be, each end deck?
I believe that's referred to in your documentation. You can certainly look in the plans there, what they have presented to us.
Okay, I missed that, because did you see what that?
I didn't see, that's why
I did
asked.
not see that either.
missed
That's one of my, that's one of my questions as well.
We have
There
pictures.
are pictures, but
Right.
no measurements.
No measurements.
No
The-
measurements.
Excuse me. It looks like they'll, from page A1.1, will be increasing by approximately 36 feet in the center section.
No, but that's not the question we're asking.
Correct,
We got
correct.
we have two end decks.
How big are they?
How big are they now, and how big will they be?
Right.
And then we'll deal with the two center ones after that.
Mr. Pritzios, do you have the answer to that question?
So
You don't have to
I
give
can-
the answer right now, but I'm just curious. Do you have the
I can
dimension?
clarify, which I think will answer your question.
Jan, you want to wait until,
Well, it was started out as Bill's question.
yeah, or Bill?
And mine and Edie's, I guess, all three of us.
That's one of my
In
questions.
the
I have
submitted
several.
documentation, but let me go through the old stuff.
Well, the applicant is thinking, well, I think what we're all going to want to know is, how big are the two decks there? How big are they, and then what would the whole total deckage be on all four? Because I think that's where a lot of us are asking.
Yeah, how
Are
big
they
is it
going to
now?
match? Are the new ones going to match?
I think that says they're going to match, but I think that the issue is how much coverage is it going to be?
I presumed that they were thinking they were going to match, but I was going to ask the question, the new ones, if what they're asking.
So I guess my question is, if it's a 10 by 10 deck now on the far end, what will it be? What each one will be?
Thank you. I have a document here from February 16th of 1997 depicting what looks to be the application at the time for the new decks to be constructed are 15 feet wide
And
on each end. So you were talking 30 feet.
so the current deck is 15 feet wide this way.
And 7
How
feet
far-
depth.
And so it's 7 by 15.
Each one.
Correct.
Each existing one.
And what will it be?
It will be,
Or what do they want it to be?
The depth would not be changing. It would stay at 7 feet.
The
We're not,
depth. The
we're not
depth.
asking for any more depth.
Right. How about width?
The width, which Matt has in front of him, the design is changing because the railings are getting wider and the entrance to each door is getting wider, which,
To meet the criteria.
to meet the
ADA.
criteria, which makes the decks wider. They're essentially 4 decks altogether, then separated with dividers. That's how the drawings show.
So is it basically one
It's
long deck?
one large deck, not exceeding 7 feet, which is the current distance off of the construction.
But if I understand what you're saying, if you look at the pictures you have, and you've got the 4 units, you're saying there's a deck that basically goes the
It's a
entire
deck with
length?
dividers, correct?
And it just has railings and other things
It
on it,
has
but it's basically
railings.
one long deck, 7 feet deep, the entire length of the building.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
comparing the documentation from 97 to today's submittal, adding the 30 feet of existing new deck to the proposed 36 feet, you're looking at a roughly 66 feet across the front of the building.
And now it's 30 feet, 15 on each side?
15 on each side, that's correct.
Nothing in the center, yeah.
And nothing in the way. Okay, Jan, any further questions?
I don't, thank you. I think Edie does.
Yeah, Bill?
No, I'm set.
Okay.
Thank you.
Edie?
Yeah, I had a couple for you, Matt, please. What is normally, in quotes, done with older properties that are not ADA, but don't now meet code? I mean, is there a normal? Or is it always a variance application, or what happens? I'm sure this isn't the first time or last that you'll have such a request.
In most instances, you need to bring that stuff up to code, up to the ADA compliance standards. So a lot of times, the construction can go through without variance requests. Here, because they're adding additional structure, they need the variance request to go forward with it.
So an add-on question there, is there anything that these owners can do that makes their properties ADA compliant that does not involve this kind of a solution? One of our criteria, as you know, is to look at, are we doing the minimal amount we can do if a variance is granted? And I'm asking, is this the minimal that could be done to resolve the ADA issue, or are there other options?
Might be a hard question.
Yes.
Yeah, there's certainly different things out there that they could do. This is the option they're choosing.
That they're choosing. Okay. What happens when the deck, let's say this is approved. I'm not saying anything either way, but what happens when new decking deteriorates in X amount of time, just as the decking from 1997 has? Do they come back with another variance application, or what happens? Because this is a standard thing. Materials die.
Right, so the variance would carry through. They would have the right to repair and replace what they
Okay.
build at that point. If they wanted to increase that structure, they'd obviously have to come back for another variance request.
If what they're asking was built today on a property that was not overcovered, would code require the types and size of ADA restraints that are being considered?
Because this is technically a commercial use, yes, the ADA compliance standards would need to be met to today's code.
Are the owners under an onus to meet ADA requirements under a certain timeline? Or is this just their choice of this is when they want to do this? Or is there a timeline that they're needing to meet?
I'd let the applicant answer that.
Okay?
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Mark, I didn't.
I have a question for Fred, if I may. Being that this is a condominium, and I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that if a condominium association is requested by one of its unit owners to bring a property up to ADA standards, they have no choice but to do it if it doesn't cause an unjust hardship to the rest of the condominium association. Is that correct? If that were correct, would this not be their case? That they would, if one owner requesting this,
So
it would be mandatory?
even if it's mandatory, the presence of the zoning code would require that this board consider granting the relief. I think the question is whether a disabled individual is entitled to a reasonable accommodation from any kind of a restriction which interferes with their ability to use the property as a non-disabled person would be able to use it or occupy it. So they still need to come here and ask for relief. Matt, you said that this is a commercial use, right?
It is.
And can you explain why that is? And why it's not-
Certainly. It is a commercial use because it is more than two family dwellings. So a residential application is for 1 and 2 family dwellings. Anything above 2 family dwellings, it becomes a commercial use, and commercial codes apply to that use.
So that's not implying anything about the actual use necessarily. There's no businesses that are occupying these units. They're used for residential purposes, but they are required to comply with the commercial.
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jan.
The 2 centers that do not currently have a deck, they're just like flat. Are they already, I mean, they just exist, so people can just wheel there in their wheelchair or walker or something?
There are steps up.
Well, there's only like 2 or 3 steps up.
Right. You know, there are stairs there to enter the front of the building.
But they've
For
been
each
there
unit.
since 1981.
They have.
Okay.
So the question for you will be, does what the owner or applicants have in mind constitute a normal development, a desire to develop a property in a normal fashion, given the applicability of the code, the ADA code.
Right.
I have one other question that I did not ask, also for Matt, of course. If 50% of the gross area needs to be, and I'm talking about the natural, I'm wondering, what is this property's coverage? I saw the words over-covered in the, but I didn't understand exactly what that was. Grossly over-covered, slightly over-covered? Where are we on that, please?
I would approximate it at about 100% coverage. But it's important to remember that these structures were built at a time that the zoning code was different.
Right. Does their promise, so to speak, of grass and planting beds where the stones are in the future, does that change the coverage numbers at all? Because that's natural, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So if it's, as long as it is a grass plant or a natural mulch, it will bring their coverage numbers down. So, you know, obviously we're willing to work with the applicant to provide and give back some coverage, you know, to the city. But again, with the rules of existing nonconformity, it's basically their choice at this point.
I see. So there's no stipulation on your end that they would need to make at least X amount of coverage natural if this variance was approved?
Correct.
I understand. Thank you. That's
Fred, can I ask a question back to your earlier comment? Is there anything as to the two center units that the ADA would require them to do? They've got stairs. Is there anything that and maybe we could ask the applicant as well?
That's,
At a certain price,
if they were residential units, they wouldn't have to comply with the ADA, right?
if they were two single-family residential units, yes, they would not have ADA requirements, but because there's 4 of them,
Right.
It brings that into question. There are stipulations in the ADA code that once you hit a certain price threshold, much like the 50% rules that go across nonconformity and things like that, there are price points that once you hit those, it is recommended that you bring and you start to recognize some of those ADA compliance factors. We know that new buildings have to recognize that across the board. We have to put those systems into place now. It gets very tricky with old buildings and existing buildings, and how do we bring those up to code? We do have an existing building code that instructs us, but it doesn't necessarily demand. So you'll find, like a lot of these businesses right now, some of them are not ADA compliant, but because they don't have to be. They haven't reached that threshold to be able to make those changes or be required to make those changes in some of their uses.
Maybe I'll ask a question a different way. If the applicant weren't coming here today, would the building inspector be knocking on their door saying you need to make changes because of the ADA with respect to access?
It would not.
Your answer is no.
It would
correct?
not, correct.
Okay, thank you.
And Matt, the price point you were referring to would be the cost of renovations to the property with respect to the value of the improvements. right?
Correct.
So if they were doing something, if they were improving the property to such a large extent, once they reach that price point or ratio, they then would have to bring their property into compliance at, that's what you're referring to.
Correct, and it's important to remember that it's the structure that needs the appraisal and not the structure and the land. Just sort of throw that caveat in there.
So it's low
Can you tell us the nature of the non-compliance exactly?
coverage.
ADA
It would be the-
non-compliance? No, the ADA non-compliance.
No, it's not.
So for the ADA compliance, it would be the width, the handrails, the
Width of the
graspability,
deck or
the width of the
The
stairs.
rest of it in here, but the width of the door.
The width of the stairs, it would be first and foremost. The graspability of handrails. Guardrails are not currently to 42 inches. They are at 36 inches. So there's a couple things going on with the railings and the decks themselves.
Size-wise.
Correct.
Are there back entrances? So if I had a wheelchair and I wanted to go in the back door, is there a back entrance that I can go into?
I believe there are back entrances, but they are not compliant at this time.
And Well, are they flat on the ground, or are they, what do you mean by not compliant?
So ADA compliance is a 1/4 inch rise. So whatever your flat surface that you're leaving and getting up into can be no more than a 1/4 inch. Those are 4, 5, 6 inches in some cases on the back doors.
But they're not steps that lead up to it. They're
They,
not like
there are
stairs.
not steps in most cases, and I believe there are some decks and some other patios and things back there that elevate above.
So they already have patios and decks in the back.
There are areas back there for various uses.
So it's not grass and stuff.
It is not.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. I
Any-
have a brother in a wheelchair, so a brother-in-law.
Any further questions for the building inspector? Okay, this time I'd like to move over to Mr. Pritzios?
Pritzios.
Pritzios, thank you.
Thank you.
And you,
Thank you. Well, I think a lot of our information was covered today, but on behalf of the condo association and the 4 units and the owners, I'd like to thank the Board of Adjustment for having us and hearing us today. So a quick history, and Matt went through much of it, built in the early 80s. Soon after the association sought to get decks approved, they went through this process. Financially speaking, that's why the 2 inner units did not go with decks, but the 2 exterior units did. That's why there's 2 of the 4. Okay. So I think in hindsight, we wish we would have done this a long time ago. However, that brings us here today. A lot of a history lesson for us, realizing that we were commercially zoned. And I think that brings us to a couple things. We have aging homeowners. My folks are here today, Dino and Evelyn. They're approaching their 80s. And Carrie, whose mom's not here today, she owns one of the units without the decks. She's in her early 90s, and if we're able to show the video, you'll get to see, and we can talk a little bit more about the hardship. So what we're seeking is basically new decks. We talked about the disrepair on the 2 exterior decks. They need to be redone. The 2 interior ones where we've got our parents having challenges. Faye Gold, who owns the one, who's Carrie's mom, can't even enter her unit from the front. Your question about the decks on the back, two of the 4 units have decks. Hers does, and she's able to enter her unit because the steps getting into the door it's less of an elevation. It's much easier access. The commercial zoning is actually probably a blessing in disguise, because if this is approved, the extra railing security, the wider steps would help gain entrance into the front, particularly for units that are in question that do not have the deckings when using a cane or a stepper. And you'll see that also in the video. So I guess sort of to conclude here, and maybe we can show the video, Matt, after this, and then probably take some questions. Look, we're seeking for an exception. We feel like we're putting a hardship in front of us. We've got aging homeowners. Of the 4 units, we've got 3 of the original owners. I will likely, and Carrie, you can see, are being the recipient of generations carrying these over for hopefully a long period of time. And, you know, aside from the beautification, I think you had asked the question, Jan, you know, what would the materials be like? We're looking for a top-of-the-line vinyl with a beautification. I think that would add to not only the curb appeal for the units, but also the neighborhood in general. As a give back, I think it was also stated we would be looking to replace the current stones or gravel that is, I think, coded as impermeable with grass and shrubs and plantings.
thank you. Would you like to show the video now for us?
Be kind to the editor here. We did our best. So as you can see here, this is an iteration. These are the front steps of one of the units that does not have a deck. This is Carrie representing with a walker, which his mom does use. And you can see the challenges. The steps are very narrow, very difficult to juggle the two things, juggle between the walker and accessing the door the way it sits today. If the decks were in place there, you obviously don't have the railing on the left side and you can access, you've got a wider area to enter the unit. May want to turn this up.
Go.
Hi, my name is Faye Gold, and I'm the owner of the property at 10B Virginia Avenue in
We
Rehoboth
can't take
Beach,
testimony through
Delaware.
this method.
When we
So if
bought
you have
the
images you want to
property,
show us,
that's
fine.
Understood. Okay.
Of course,
if you want to characterize the gist of
What she's saying.
what she's saying, that's fine with me.
Yeah, Faye's saying, you know, look, I've lived in here a long time. I love my unit. It's important to me. I've got trouble accessing my unit from the front. Again, here's one of the four homeowners that can only access her unit from the back. From a standpoint of safety, you know, it would be a game changer and livability, lifestyle.
From the front door of the property.
Hello,
This is more testimony
my name
from-
is Dino Riccio.
Is there anything
My
else
wife and I own two
testimony
units.
for us to see?
Yeah, I think there's a few photos, I think, which are also in your packet. So, yeah, we can probably stop there, and I'll just make a couple comments. I think the high level, you understand, we were asking for a hardship, the realization that one homeowner can't access her unit any longer from the front. The second one was coming from my father, who's had 2 knee replacements and also has struggles. And with the unit without the deck, it's a harder access.
Okay, thank you. Is that finished for your testimony? Okay, I want to start with some questions. Understanding the need here, the practical difficulty is for the ADA, you know, access to each unit. Did you explore any other kind of entrance that's ADA compliant, like a ramp? In other words, you're putting an entire deck across the face of the unit, but you do not need an entire deck to enter the building for compliancy. Did you look into any kind
No,
of?
fair question, and we didn't understand that we needed the ADA compliant until we filed for the 2 new decks in the front. You know, it's not lost on any of us. Decks have a beautification to them. We get to, you know, those units are located ocean block. It's got a great view. There's, you know, there's something beautiful about sitting outside and looking at the ocean.
Fair enough. As far as, you know, the lot coverage, so if we call it 100%, 99 or 100%, I know that, you know, the stone goes all the way out to the brick curbing, and then the brick curbing goes all the way out to the curb.
Correct.
So what would you be removing to get it from 100% coverage down to some number?
Great question. Yeah, so the construction, unfortunately, again, done in the early 80s, there is a lot of concrete and there's a lot of stone on that property.
Yeah.
And so our give back would be to assess all the stone. So there's the stone basically from the 2 units that have the decks today out to the brick curb, as explained. And then the 2 that do not have decks have a bit more. All of that would be replaced. Obviously, a portion if the decks are approved. The rest of that going up to the brick.
Okay, and then what about?
We had a conversation with Matt, because I asked, because our brick sidewalks are actually wider than the rest of the street. And I asked, could some of that be taken out? And, you know, we could get credit for that by using grass plantings or shrubs or mulch.
So is it your intention to shorten the sidewalk, or you're going to leave it alone?
Would be very much open to that. I don't know if that's allowed or permitted. That seems more like another exception that we would have to file for.
Yeah, I wouldn't know whether you needed a variance to resize a sidewalk to proper sizes, you know.
If you were going smaller, you
yeah.
would not be,
Yeah.
and not for a sidewalk.
Okay, thank you. And I'm assuming the bushes there are old, they would be replaced.
They would be
New-
pulled out and
okay,
replaced. They're long overdue.
Okay. And, okay, so you answered my one question about, you didn't realize ADA compliancy until after you started this, okay. Okay, they were my questions. Ask the board.
How, the deck isn't going to have a ramp on it, or is it? I mean, you still have to go up steps,
You still have to go up steps,
so that hasn't
At this
changed
time.
at all.
correct, in the drawings that we have today.
Okay, I know, I was just curious, because I couldn't figure out how you could get up there with a wheelchair.
There'd be handrails, but there would
Well,
still be
other than
steps.
handrails, yeah, but okay, so there's still steps, that doesn't change at all. So how does that make it ADA compliant, because of the handrails, Matt?
The handrails, the width of actually,
Of
of the
to go
steps
up?
themselves, and also in a commercial application, the risers get lower as well. So your steps, the amount of step that you take up is smaller than a residential application.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you.
Anything else, Jan?
Nope.
Okay. Bill?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Edie?
I have a question. Where is the parking?
Parking is in the back. There's 2 parking spaces per unit.
So people park in the back, but you want them to be able to come in through the front with a walker and or a wheelchair or something?
Well, there's optional parking in the front. There's public parking in the front.
Give a pass and all that.
Right, but in general, your owners,
Well, for instance, I think where you're going, and completely agree, is if you were bringing somebody up who might need some extra help, likely just pull up to the front, get them into the unit, come around back. That's what we would do.
so they're still, though, entering from the street, because there's nothing, they're coming from the street, across the sidewalk, across this, where the stones are now, to whatever is going to be there. So,
Yeah,
right,
there's sidewalk entrances to each unit in the
right,
front.
I have the picture here, okay. That's my only question.
Okay. Mark?
I have no questions.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? So there's a picture, I think this is picture 1. I think it's the one that's not numbered.
Yes, it is, one is not numbered, you're correct.
And then you've seen these pictures, obviously, you submitted them, correct? And then picture 2, it looks like this. So would we be able, I don't know if it would be with Matt's help or not, to quantify some area? Because if these variances are to be granted, and there is to be some quid pro quo, we're going to need to quantify that. Otherwise, the building official will not know whether you're meeting the bargain. And again, it still remains to be seen what the board will do with the application. But is there some, so I take it that this impermeable surface runs from one edge of the lot all the way to the other, because you've got about 100% coverage, right? So the whole width is impermeable. Is there a certain number of feet that the board should ask for and ask you whether you can approve that would be converted to permeable surface? Can you offer us a number?
All stone be removed, 80%,
Well,
Right.
like from there
Or the
to
square
there
foot,
or
or the square footage of the
right,
net result.
right.
I mean, one way to think about it would be all stone, let's say, after assumed decks are in place, all stone in the front, and there is stone on both sides, which could also be removed, which would count. Those are next to basically the driveway access. That would be a give back that the homeowners could approve.
Is there, you said there was concrete everywhere. Is there concrete under the stone in front? Or is it just
No,
gravel?
I misspoke there. It's concrete from a standpoint of the driveway access and parking in the back
Oh,
is all
okay.
concrete.
So that's just stone, which
That's
actually,
all- yes,
stone
that's
is
just-
permeable.
Am I correct that
Pebble rock.
the driveway is a drive-through, you have arrows, correct? That
Correct.
you go on one, you enter one side, I'm sorry, and come out on the other based on the arrows on the concrete.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep, yep,
And
yep,
that's not included in any of your pictures directly.
correct, yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
no fault for that. I'm making sure that my other board members know that.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay, at this time, we're going to ask if there is anyone from the public. I think we saw one wishing to speak. Come up, identify yourself, please, and Fred will swear you in.
My name is Sam Cooper. I live at 13 Newcastle Street here in the city.
Mr. Cooper, do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I came here today, I read the information online last evening with the idea that this was a somewhat minimal request and probably in favor of it personally. It doesn't matter because you're the people that decide it. But I'm now scratching my head because I think you have a lack of information. You've sussed out some of it, but a lot of that should have been given to you up front. I'm surprised. I've known people who wanted to replace the front walkway to their home, and they have to provide a survey to the city. You don't even have a survey, and I assume that would be required before a permit could be issued. Jan, I think you're on the right track. I mean, I think the idea, and I think the gentleman's been up front with you. You know, they really want the deck, and the ADA came in afterwards, sort of. But, you know, I believe that a commercial building has to have a ramping system to be able to get to it. I question whether this is a commercial building. I am guessing, in my limited world of knowledge, that it's either 4 single-family dwellings separated by a firewall or two-family buildings separated by a firewall. If it's either of those, and I would question with having a deck all the way across the front, that you've now created a fire potential that wasn't there before and would be a code consideration. But, you know, I think you're going to have to weigh this deck all the way across. I thought they just wanted 4 little decks in front of each, and, you know, making it consistent would have been, but the one going all the way, again, I think it's a total lack of information. I mean, you've been asked to give variances to natural area. I think the solicitor hit on it. I mean, you know, what are you going from and to? You have none of that. I mean, I think a variance ought to be very much more specific than, yeah, just do what you said you're going to do. We don't, you know, it's only been given as testimony was what the size of these decks are going to be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I get to respond, or is that not how this works?
Let's ask if anyone else.
Anyone else wish to speak?
Okay, thank you. And some good comments. You know, I think, look, our plans are specific. We have looked at the idea of separating each deck too. That's an alternative, which, to the gentleman's point, would be 4 separate decks. There would be some spacing in between. At the end of the day, you're basically accomplishing the same thing. You're getting 4 unified decks. From a look standpoint, then they all look the same. So, you know, that is something that we can, as homeowners, reconsider. I'm not sure, I mean, I think on the site, it has all that information on not only the building, but also the sidewalk area. So that information has been provided. And then lastly, it is divided, just to clarify, it is divided by 1 firewall.
Okay, now regarding the survey, the building inspector has it, but we do not. We do not have the survey. So, I mean, that's a question here, I guess, for the, you know, the board, whether we can proceed on without this, you know.
So these current 4 sets of stairs encroach, well, they violate the natural area. And do they don't encroach in the front yard setback?
They do not.
So what the applicant is seeking is that these areas that are encroaching be expanded to one uniform extension in front of the structure with no roof, uncovered, right? And be no deeper than the 7, I think, did you say 7 feet?
7 feet
All right,
currently.
so it'd be the same depth all the way across the front.
Correct.
I think that's sufficient information for you to decide whether you wish
Okay.
to approve the application.
Okay.
To be clear, they'd be contiguous, there would be one deck around the entire front. In other words, your building's 15 foot per unit, if you're building a 15-foot deck.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, that's
So
that's
we
about
want
right.
continuous
Yes.
deck.
It'd be a 60-some foot long deck
So we-
with 4 stairways up and 4 sets of
For
handrails.
wide stairways, railings on both sides, correct, and then dividers.
I do want to poke a little bit at what Mr. Cooper was saying about, is there any fire hazard issues here?
Thank you,
by
Chair.
having-
I was just getting ready to interject there. They still need to go through the permitting process. Regardless of the variance being offered to them today, they will still have to apply to the fire marshal, get the approval from the fire marshal, bring it back to my office for our approval for the building permit.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
And it seems to me that, or maybe this is during deliberation, right?
I don't know what you're going to ask.
Well, what we were saying, I thought, was that the 7 foot would take the place of everything that's there, which is true. But what I see in the pictures and what I saw when I walked over and just stood on the sidewalk and looked, was that the 2 decks come deeper into the property in the front than the stairways do. The stairways are a little farther back, and if you look at where the deck goes, it's farther out. So actually, it's a longer, it's a deeper, I'll say intrusion, and I don't mean to be negative by saying that, but a deeper intrusion across the entire area.
7 foot across the front.
Right, where the steps are not 7 feet.
Correct.
So, yeah.
So it's bigger than what's existing.
It's bigger than,
Don't think so.
it's the decks that exist are 7. They say.
There's existing 7, I have and I'll ask the property owner, but at least the Google Maps picture, the steps go beyond the end of the deck. So that if you start going up the steps and then you hit the deck.
I'm talking about the middle units that don't have a deck. Those,
two, okay,
their
the two
steps are
bricks.
indented farther, so that,
I think you're correct on that,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, with no other public question, we're going to close down the public portion of this case, and then the board will now deliberate. You get to hear us go back and forth, and then we will make a decision, a vote on whether we approve this or not. So, to the board, anyone want to open up the conversation on this? Go ahead, Mark.
I'd just say that personally, I have a great respect for ADA compliancy. I'm sorry. I have a great respect for ADA compliancy, and I would weight that very heavily. I'm looking over our 4 criteria, and I don't see that it is a valid, there's no harm to any of those. It doesn't seem that any of those would prevent us from approving it.
Edie, thoughts on what Mark said or your own?
one of the things that has been stressed, I think, to us is that we should be looking at the property, not the individual.
That is correct.
And it seems like a lot of the information that has been given to us is about the individuals in the property. And I don't know exactly how to weigh that versus the property itself. There are obviously issues with the property, but the testimony seems to be heavily on why, because of the individuals.
Okay.
Maybe Fred can help us
Right, so,
walk through that.
so generally, what you said is correct,
Yeah,
and that's what we've talked about.
right, that's right.
So I don't want to contradict myself. But what, I think it's appropriate for you to look at this in the context of what would be considered a normal improvement, a desire by an owner to make a normal improvement to the property. And if this improvement is made more difficult, or if their desire to construct improvements here are made more difficult as a result of access considerations brought about by ADA, or just that generally speaking, not maybe these individuals, but any other individuals could be challenged somewhat in accessing this property, whether they're guests or future owners. So I think that's one perspective you can bring to it that is in the context of the exceptional practical difficulty. Is this a normal improvement? And is it normal because what's being sought after is generally something desirable by this owner and maybe perhaps future owners?
I see. Thank you for the clarification, Fred.
Well, I like to go through things, by each of the quick check 1, 2, 3, and 4. And when I look at this in regard to the nature of the zone, that I see no problem of adding a deck in a residential zone. I mean, it's common across Rehoboth. Quick check number 2, the character. Again, putting a deck in, be it a commercial property, in a residential, I don't think it's an impact to the character. Would adding a deck impact your neighbors? Quick check number 3. Again, I don't see much, any kind of impact. The questions I have is quick check number 4.
Right.
You're replacing existing stone, and you're putting on top. Again, it's something that's already 100% covered, and in fact, you're giving back to the city, from natural area. As Edie and Fred had said, we look to the land, not necessarily the owner. And I think ADA compliancy is a good thing, doing something for the property. If you've explored the ways to make this compliant, and if it's a deck, and if again it has to be a separator or single, I think that's all in a good thing. So in what I'm thinking is you're actually reducing structure on the property. You're adding the deck, reducing structure. So I'm kind of, leaning towards, being okay with the 4 quick check items. Jan?
Well, actually, they're not reducing structure because they're adding 2 structures to the 2 interior units that have no structure.
But reducing structure of stone.
Well,
That's
and I understand that's
Right.
coverage, that's different. And, I think that people should be allowed to replace and repair the existing structures that are there. The 2 end ones, they obviously have an issue. The stairs look pretty bad. But I have a brother-in-law in a wheelchair, and I know exactly what they go through, and they go through in Rehoboth. But they could easily go around to the back. Jay gets out of the car, goes in the back door. It's not an issue. I have no problem with the 2 end units being replaced in comparable size. I know that our city considers pebbles impervious, but in actuality, pebbles are very pervious, and they're used in rain gardens everywhere. So the water is not pooled, and that's why I asked if there was cement underneath the pebbles. Water is going right through there anyway. So I have a problem with the 2 interior ones. I don't have a problem with the 2 end ones because I believe you should be able to replace and repair nonconformities. That's kind of my...
Thank you. Bill?
I think just following on that, to me, the issue here is the nonconformity is coverage, correct?
Correct.
It's land coverage. And so to me, and I understand, Jan, where you were, but I think and I think we would need to specify this, as Mr. Cooper said, if the deal is that they will substantially reduce the coverage, and the law says that the stones are coverage. You may disagree, but that's what the law says. And we have to abide by that. So the law says that the stones are coverage if they are going to give back considerable amount of effectively green space to the city in return for increasing coverage, the building a bit to the extent that the two decks are building, then it seems to me that where Barry is in terms of looking at the 4 factors and seeing we meet it. But I do think that the meeting it this is nonconformity. And if we're going to say on the 2 existing decks, it's really 1 for 1. On the 2 new decks, I personally prefer 4 separate decks, but I don't know whether the board is with me on that and whether we should do that.
I would agree with you on that. I think it would just look better, but
And, but I'd like to, on Mr. Cooper's point, I'd like to get an actual, I'd want this to be either conditioned or then coming back with what is it that the green space is going to be, rather than having to go back on this record and try to figure out exactly what the applicant has said they're going to do in order to say that this is frankly a
Well,
good.
we can reach out, I know the public, but we can reach out and ask Matt, is there any type of condition you can put on for the coverage reduction?
But I have a question to follow up this. We don't know what size those squares of pebbles are.
No,
So
we don't.
we're adding
No,
2
we don't.
decks that are going to be 7 by 15. And we don't know what size those pebbles are now, so it may not be, you may
What do
be
you mean, what
increasing.
size the pebbles?
In other words, you've got a square there in the yard. We don't have a survey that says, are they 5 by 5, 3 by 5, 7 by
Well,
15?
So what we know about this area is it's not natural, right? By your definition, it's not natural. And the applicant is seeking to add 7 feet along the front of the building. That could be calculated, right? 7 feet of area extending from the front of the building out. At a minimum, couldn't this board require that that area be offset by restoring an equivalent amount of square footage to a natural, to what qualifies, maybe even more? I don't know. But wouldn't that work for the,
Certainly, it would be up to the board to.
but wouldn't that work for you in
determine
terms of
that.
enforcement? Because we don't want to burden you with trying to figure out what we mean. We don't, again, I don't know if we're going
I
to pass
appreciate that.
anything here or not. But it's not fair to you to say, well, we threw something in your lap and now you've got to approve it and you don't know what it is.
Right. I think logically looking at this thing, and for whatever reason, the sequence of events for this was an application for a building permit that ultimately led to a variance request. Why the application itself and the documents provided for that application were not provided for the today's meeting, I cannot speak to. I don't know. There is a survey present on that documentation that shows the coverages, that shows the numbers, that shows the different areas for the stone coverage. Certainly, if the board would want to, they could say, remove all that stone coverage on the front, return it to natural coverage, and at that point, we would be getting our numbers down.
Would they even need a variance if they restored all this area here to natural area? I mean, isn't there more area here than 7 feet coming off the front?
I believe if the stone wasn't present, I would think they'd still need a variance request because the entire back of the property is paved or concreted.
Oh, because they're not, they could net.
It's not just a front
Yeah,
coverage.
okay,
Right.
okay. We can't get to we can't get to 50%.
Right, there's no way we could even get to a 50%. I don't think we could even get to a 60%, but I wouldn't want to toss those numbers
Okay,
around.
I understand.
But to Jan's question, I believe Mr. Petros offered to remove all of the stone from the front.
He
God
did.
knows how big it is.
That's
Right.
where we
That would
led
be
to.
sufficient, I would think, yeah.
Right.
Well,
Ca-
actually,
but the
my
decks will
I mean,
overhang.
I know what
Right.
the city
So he'll
considers
remove it all
pervious
and
and impervious,
whatever-
but the
Well,
stormwater
yeah, the
committee
city-
that's
I don't think the
on the line
ci-
does not consider
Yeah.
stone to be.
Jan, I don't think the city's talking about pervious and impervious. They're talking about natural,
Right.
natural coverage. And because we really don't know, and you're pointing this out, that we don't really measure the degree to which something is pervious or impervious. That's not within our realm right now. But we can quantify what's a natural area and what isn't. And this area could be required to be made natural in exchange for the variance.
I have 2 questions, comments. the 7 feet, does that include the steps up to the deck, or is that the width of the deck on your mat or whoever?
So it's the width of the deck. No, the depth of the deck.
Depth,
From the
okay,
front of the house
I'm
going
sorry, I
towards
meant
the.
depth, excuse me.
going
Thanks
towards
for the
the
And the
correct.
steps go beyond
And the
that.
steps go beyond that then?
They do, but it's pretty minimal.
Perhaps the steps would be on the
Pretty minimal.
walkway.
I believe it's 2 steps, so it's probably 2.5, 2 feet maybe.
Mark's asking, or,
The existing walkways would stay, so the steps would most likely be where the existing walkways are.
but they're making
Correct.
it wider.
Are the steps wider than the walkways? I guess that's your question.
Yes.
Fair question. Yeah, the way they would come down to the landing, yeah, you'd be, some of that width would probably be in mulch, quite frankly, softscape.
My other question is really more for Fred, I think. This variance is for all 4 properties. Are we allowed to say, give a variance for 2 and not for all 4? I'm just asking the question here, because Jan kind of raised that thought
So,
to treat them differently.
so this is a condominium, so it's 4 tax parcel numbers. No? It's
No,
one- It's
it
one
is
tax.
one tax parcel number. It is one lot, 100 by
4
100.
units.
4 units located on that 100 by 100 lot.
Well, I'm not sure what you're, I think the applicant is before us, and you can grant as much or as little relief as you deem necessary, and if you can identify the areas that correspond to units 1 and 2 versus 3 and 4, or 1 and 4 versus 2 and 3, then I think you can.
Sadly, though, it's the center end units that need the relief. The lack of any deck.
I guess one of the problems I have is aesthetically, it will be a lot better looking. There is no doubt that having a deck across the front will be aesthetically a lot better looking. But you know, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder too. And people come in for variances because they want one. They want to do this. It isn't, they don't have a hardship, they don't have, you know, a kid who's now in a wheelchair and they need to have ramps and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. They want it. And so from a variance perspective, the 2N units, I don't have any problem with, only because they're in bad disrepair. They need to be repaired, they're existing, you're replacing existing. It's the 2 center units I have. And is it our job to respond aesthetically to what we probably all would agree, the either 4 individual ones or 1 long one would look a lot better than what's there now. But is that our role? Is
No,
that-
I believe we don't look at the beauty of things, aesthetics.
But you can consider that in the context of what the applicant considers to be a normal improvement. I mean, if the applicant is coming forward with something, you have the obligation to ask yourself whether that's a normal improvement. I mean, because you're not here to encourage people to develop properties in ways that are inconsistent with the surrounding area or the zoning district. If you think that it makes perfect sense that the applicant would rather construct 1 uniform deck across the front as opposed to 4 individual ones, then I think you can characterize the applicant's desire as a normal desire, and you can grant it or deny it.
Well, I mean, we just had one with the pergola. And believe me, you know, if you're sitting on a deck with the sun, you know, pouring down on you, having a pergola is a really nice thing. But we don't allow them because they have to count in the floor area ratio. And so, you know, we didn't approve it, even though, and there are alternatives, as we pointed out. But that's my dilemma. You know, I understand it will look a lot better.
Yeah, but isn't the issue that the restriction here is the lot coverage? And they are reducing the lot coverage.
No, they're not reducing
Yes,
the lot
they
coverage.
are. They are. They are reducing. You don't agree because you don't agree that the stones should
No,
be
for
considered to be lot
permeable or
coverage.
not permeable, but still, they're adding structure where there is no
The
structure.
lot coverage, not building density. I'm talking about lot coverage. The lot coverage,
Well, I understand this is lot
Yes.
coverage, but they're increasing the size of their building then.
which is a lot coverage issue.
And you're talking about natural area versus lot coverage. They're two different things.
Okay, but, and so that to me is really what, maybe I'm wrong in thinking of it that way, but I'm looking at what is the restriction that we're dealing with, and they are, in my view, reducing the impingement on that restriction, which is that you can't cover more than 50% of the lot with things that this city at this point considers to be coverage.
Can we move?
But you're also increasing building coverage.
If the deck is considered is a deck considered
But
building?
it's not,
Yes, it is,
it's not
absolutely.
covered, though. It's structure, but it's not covered.
It's structure, but it's not covered.
So
But
it's
then
not
next
gross
thing
flo-
we know,
it's
we'll be
not
seeing
gro-
awnings all
but it's
over
not gross
all
floor
4
area.
decks. No.
No,
I
they're
believe-
they're not applying for an awning, right?
I believe
Yeah,
from
they don't
recent
have to. They can
case,
do that without applying.
we've determined that a deck is not necessarily.
Uncovered deck is not gross floor area.
Is anyone willing to make a motion?
I make a motion based on all the discussion we've had that we approve
Will someone second,
variance.
and based on the conversation that the board has had? Okay.
Well, there'll be a chance.
Yeah. Is there a second?
Can I ask a clarification? Does that include, in your motion, does that include the understanding that I think we have, that they are eliminating the stones in the front?
It should include that. I
No.
didn't mention it, but I should have mentioned.
Please restate that
I think we need
motion.
another
Please
motion.
restate that motion then.
We make a motion that.
Speak into-
We approve such variance, or exceptional conditions, conditioned upon the removal of all the stone from the front of the property at 10 Virginia Avenue.
Okay, and by that, I think we mean restoring that to natural area, right?
Could I just ask a clarifying question?
No, but is that right? That's the offending, that's the zoning offense, is that this is not natural area?
Correct.
Okay, I just have a clarifying question. This, to me, looks like a sewer lid right
The
here.
manhole.
A manhole cover, thank you. My understanding, so does the city own, including the manhole coverage? How far up here does the city own? Because we don't have a survey. How much of this is city property versus how much is, like on Henlopen Avenue, the first, 20 feet or
It's
something?
picture number 1.
I'm looking at picture number 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a manhole cover. Aren't the manhole covers on city property? Or are they on, in other words, how far to the sidewalk
Here, this is here.
does this property
And
go?
look at this picture.
Thank you, Jan. I'm going to guesstimate that the gravel encroaches city property by approximately 3 to 4 feet. And the manholes are located, one is directly located on on the property line, and one is stepped back onto the property.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry, you're right.
So they don't even own all of this gravel.
That is correct.
So on my street, we also have the first, 15 feet belong to the city. It's interesting. Nobody on my street encroaches on that 15 feet. We wouldn't plant anything.
For 1 second. We've got a motion, and let's see if we can get a
Okay.
second.
Second.
All right.
And then we'll
Argue.
deliberate.
Okay.
I don't know if we're going to get a second.
So do we have a second for Mark's?
Not yet.
Bill?
No, so I want to hear the answer to the discussion.
I'd
Jack.
like to
Okay.
restate,
Okay,
have
so-
restate more.
Because my understanding is you were not allowed to plant, et cetera, on city property. That is a clear understanding, as our people on Oak Avenue have been told, and we don't touch it.
Yeah, that is correct, but we have no idea, obviously, when the stone was planted. I say planted in.
I get it. So
1981.
So the stone has been
Thank you.
there since '81, and probably the city didn't even, Henlopen Avenue is all full of stuff. So my question is then, so what we're saying is that we're asking him to plant on city property.
No, we're asking him to restore it to natural area.
So it'll just be dirt there, in other words.
It could be,
plants.
it could be grass.
Sod.
It could be.
No, actually, no, not on city property, you can't do that.
You can.
You can?
You can plant grass on city property.
You can, because I was just told by Corey less than 2 months ago that you can't, but that's
All
okay.
right.
So I'm just trying to figure out what you can and can't do, because this property doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the city.
Is that a question?
So what, huh?
Jan, you want to try a motion?
No, I just want to, I was trying to find out, you know, obviously they can take up all the gravel and stuff, but then what, I mean,
Can I just make a comment? Maybe your comments are true in reality, but in practicality, we pay for the weeding, we pay for the cleanliness, we treat it like it's our own. So if it's city property, we've been taking care of it for, you know, over 40 years.
it's all over this town.
Okay,
You're not by
okay.
yourself.
I just wanted to make
It's all
sure.
over the town, you know.
Thank you.
I'm surprised just because you have sidewalks, you know, most of the streets don't have sidewalks. So anyway, I'm just curious, that's all.
To kind of give you an answer to your question, the current push is to restore natural area, regardless of encroachment on city property. What that material might be, we are trying to bring back that natural coverage. Obviously, no structures would be allowed to be placed there, and we're really looking for either, and obviously, every situation is completely different in respect to an application that might have a parking space in front of it that is now grass. We would request that they would put stone there to let people know that it is public parking that is available for someone to park their car there if they have a permit or et cetera. But in most cases, we're looking to restore natural coverage back and get rid of the offenses that have occurred for many years.
So the sidewalk, which is wider here, actually is a city sidewalk, and they can't take it away anyway.
Actually, they are responsible for the upkeep
Well, I
and
know they
maintenance
are,
of
but I
that.
mean, they can't remove it.
They could remove it and replace it.
Well, yeah, but there will always be a sidewalk there, I guess. There
Right.
will. Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Do you want to go with the motion, or do you want to?
Mr. Chair.
Mark, can you restate your motion again, please?
Certainly. Based on the discussions we've had and a review of the 4 quick check criteria that we use, I make a motion that we approve this request for variance contingent upon an agreement with the owner of 10 to 12 Virginia Avenue to remove all the stone in the front of that property that he is allowed to remove by way of the city rules.
And replace it with.
Just
Replace it with a natural,
Restore it to
restore
natural.
to
Right.
natural.
to a natural condition considered non-permeable.
And can I get a second on that?
I'll second that.
Okay. All right, at this time, we will now vote. So Mark, I'm going to start with you to vote on your
I vote yes.
And here's where you'll give your reasons.
vote, yeah, and why.
And the reasons that I just mentioned is a quick review of the 4 criteria that we use. I see that this is not in any way affects the neighbors, the neighborhood, and I believe it, especially based on the ADA components of this, I believe this is a necessity to this particular owner. That's my reason for voting yes.
Thank you. Edie, I'm going to go to you.
I vote to approve also, based on the quick check criteria. And my primary positive is the fact that this is a normal improvement. And it seems to me that the owner is making a reasonable effort to meet the criteria that for normalcy and adding the ADA and moving ahead. So I'm comfortable with that as the other criteria, as Mark mentioned.
Okay, Jan, I'm going to go to you.
I'm going to vote against it, and I'm going to vote against it because I support the 2-end decks, and I think that's the right thing to do, but I don't support the middle decks. In addition, when you were talking about these foundation plants, they won't be existing anymore, nor can you put them back there when the decks are there. They're gone. So, I mean, I support taking the pebbles out and doing, but I just can't support adding 2 non-compliant structures when they don't exist. Absolutely, one should repair, replace, and fix the ones that are there, and I totally support that. So I'm a no.
No, okay. And Bill?
I support it. For the reasons that have been previously stated, I believe it meets the 4 quick check factors and the additional undertaking by the applicant to restore the natural state is effectively what the nonconforming use is, so that I believe they're actually reducing the amount of nonconforming use.
Thank you. And I am going to vote for the motion as well. Quick check number 4, I believe, has been, or all 4 quick checks have been met. Specifically, my questions were for number 4, for the ADA compliancy and the fact that this contingency of restoring it back to natural area, I think, is a plus for the city. So I am voting yes as well. So it's approved.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may we have a 5-minute break in between?
Sure. All right, quick break.
Some of us need a bathroom.
Yeah.
All right.
So we don't.
We got a hot bench.
the second building inspector's report for the second variance.
We're going to address it as we see it.
Yeah, I mean, I've asked that question from the first time I read all this.
I did too. I mean, I had the question, but I didn't know I could, and now I've learned something.
Yeah, we can talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, here, I can ask you this. I didn't know I could ask you this outside of once receiving materials, if I could.
No. For 7 years.
No, I noticed that right away. I kept reading, saying, okay, where's the other one? Where's the other one?
I was a Washington lawyer for 40 years, so tell me about
Yeah.
cynical.
So I had
I couldn't discern heads or tails on the last sentence or two. Yes.
Yeah, but they typed it again.
Yeah, well, that's
The
why I
city of
wanted to
Rehoboth
make
Beach
this
does not have an ordinance that protects
we'll see what
homeowners
happens.
from purchasing
I'm sure I will
houses
learn
where
my
the
lesson.
quote-unquote basement does not
could I just
comply with IBC and cannot be finished or used. However,
Are ignorant?
no, homeowners
Homeowners
are ignorant
to
just, let's see, to something.
Contractor?
code-
Maybe it's
No, construction code.
Construction code, of
Construction
course,
code and law. The applicant cannot use the full house allocated for habitual space for their large family.
Thank you.
And actually, that was repeated when they
It
redid
was
it.
written, it was printed.
Yeah, when they redid it. Because they redid this. You didn't print it.
It would be the end. Well, this was the packet.
No.
Yeah, I
it was-
didn't print
Yeah,
this.
here, I can show you.
That was a good idea to reprint it.
Well,
Now
I
I've
only
learned.
did-
I've
I
learned
learned
next
it
time
on-
I'll
I
print
did it
everything.
only at the end. That's what-
I'm going to follow your example.
Didn't Lewis just vote that all new houses have to have?
Here.
I have mixed feelings about that, but,
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, but what I learned in Parks and Shade Tree was that I would read things kind of, and maybe print a few things. But I wouldn't actually print it until just before the meeting because there were new.
Changes were
there were
made, yeah.
changes. But see, they actually.
So Barry, I told myself my entire legal career that I was never going to be a judge.
I apologize for the email, because when
the
Ann
first
sent
one
it out,
was typed.
your middle initials,
second-
J.
Every day,
that's part of what
why I
our
didn't want to
stormwater
become a
committee was
judge.
saying, that Dewey Beach requires, and we don't.
Okay, let's get back together here.
For the record, we have full attendance of our board
The
members.
board is back, yep. Okay. All right, let's get started. Our second case today is case number 0922-09 for the property located at 229 Hickman Street. The property is located in the R1 residential district. The applicant is seeking relief from the zoning code 270-20 height regulations, and as the application stated, section 270-21B, to exceed the regulations in both codes, the FAR and the height. I would like to know at this point, just by a show of hands, if anyone is here today to speak for or against the variance. If so, you'll have an opportunity to speak after. Yeah, two, okay, thank you. Okay. And again, I'm going to ask, and again, we don't have a hand about the notification. I do know that the property, the signs were posted on the property. Again, after the applicants and the building inspector finish speaking, board asking questions, the public will have a chance to ask their questions, and then we'll close the public session down and the board will discuss. So at this point, I want to start with a presentation from the city.
Thank you, Chair. Before you today is case number 1022-09. The location of this application is 229 Hickman Street. The applicant/owner is Denise and Brian Kelly of 907 Canmara Drive, Westchester, PA 19380. The representative today is Dylan Crew. The subject before you is the applicant seeks relief from the following: 270-20 height regulations, and related code section would be 270-21 natural area floor area ratio and lot coverage. The nature of the request is as follows. The applicants, Denise and Brian Kelly, owners of 229 Hickman Street, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, 19971, are seeking a variance to 270-20 height regulations to allow an increase in height of 1 foot 2 inches from the existing height of 34.85 feet for a total of 36.02 feet, measured from the center line of Hickman Street of a structure that was completed in 2021. The applicants seek to create habitable space in an existing uninhabitable basement according to 2018 IRC, area of 6 foot 6 to a total height of 7 foot 10. Those numbers are taken from their plans submitted. The property is located at 229 Hickman Street, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware 19971, and is situated in the R1 residential district. The property is listed in Sussex County records as tax map number 334, 14.17, 442.00. The parcel measures 50 feet by 102 feet. It is a lot, and it contains 5,100 square feet. Background information. The new single-family residence was applied for and permitted in July of 2020. A certificate of occupancy was issued on January 20th, 2021. As is required to close out the permit, a survey was submitted showing the structure was 34.85 feet as measured from the center line of the road, in this case Hickman. At the time of application, the builder applicant did not apply for a habitable basement or seek to take advantage of the basement credit. Thus, the building was applied for and constructed with a 6 foot 6, in quotations, Rehoboth basement. Upon final inspection and issuing of the certificate of occupancy, the house was calculated to contain 2,775 square feet of the maximum allowable 3,030 square feet of floor area ratio. And that calculation is the size of the lot times 60%, since they do not have any kind of water feature for this application. The variance requested is as follows. The applicant is seeking relief from the following ordinances. 270-20 is the height regulations. A, except as specified in the following subsections of this section, the height of a building or structure hereafter erected or altered in respect to height shall not exceed that given in the following table. And I've abbreviated the table so as not to include the other stuff that's not pertinent to this. All residential districts and ER district is 35, but not to exceed 2.5 floors or stories above grade. The increase in height from a recorded 34.85 feet to an approximate 36.02 feet, an increase of approximately 1 foot 2 inches, violates this code section and therefore needs a variance to allow the encroachment of the 35-foot total height measured from center line of Hickman Street. Conclusion, the applicant seeks to raise the existing structure to make a non-habitable basement area into a habitable area purportedly to create additional bedrooms and living spaces. The raising of the structure violates the allowable building height and requires a variance to allow the permit to be issued. There is potential for the owners to seek additional variance requests. After advising the applicant of this concern, there's been no additional information supplied for this variance request. The applicant and owners must understand that this request is for an increase in height only.
Okay, I have a series of questions for the building inspector. So again, we are talking about this only addressing the height variance that we are here today for. In other words, if this were to be approved, I just wanted to be on record, we would be approving the height only, not what the application says, which is height and FAR.
Correct. And that is because I was not supplied additional information that I requested. For me to be able to make determinations of uses, I need to see floor plans, I need to see layouts of what the extent of the use of that basement is going to be. Because there could be additional requirements if there were sleeping conditions presented in those basements. They therefore would need egress conditions out of those sleeping conditions.
Thank you. Does the city of Rehoboth Beach, the basement and crawl space, we align to the international building codes? Is that true? Is that too general?
That's a great question. In the IRC, which the code applies to this, habitable space is 7 feet. A finished habitable space is 7 feet. Where the 6'6" came from in our zoning code, I cannot correlate that to any knowledge. It just appeared suddenly in iterations past. 6'6" is not a habitable area according to the building code. The only exception being 6'8" is for utility rooms and for bathrooms. Everything else across the board, when it comes to the building code, needs a 7'0" finished clear head height to be habitable.
To be habitable. So let me ask this question. Are the crawl spaces of Rehoboth Beach compliant? They're 2 foot high, 3 foot high. They're compliant with code, correct?
They are compliant with the code, but they're not habitable.
Correct. Okay, thank you. Have there ever been any issues with this builder, Evergreen, with the city? I mean, I'm assuming they are licensed, and has there ever been any issues?
Well, I'm not sure how that can be relevant to what we're discussing today.
I'll ask it during, I guess, when it led from my question I have for the homeowner, so I will scratch that at this point. If we let me see. Okay, you already answered that. We are only talking about the height here. And just a small nuance. In the architectural drawing, it said something about front stairs requiring another variance. Can you explain that? There wasn't much detail on that in the report. It said the front stairs would require a variance. Is that just simply because everything would come up, the steps would come out one more?
So, right, thank you, Chair. In our code, you are allowed to encroach setbacks in 2 occurrences by up to 2 feet. Those 2 occurrences are for stairs and for chimney boxes. That is the only exceptions we give to the allowable encroachment of setbacks.
Okay, and this, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. You follow.
So,
You got it.
so with the raising of the structure, more treads would be required, therefore additional steps would be required to get into the front of the property.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Fred.
No, that's it.
You good?
That was-
Okay.
yep.
And this might sound like a crazy question, but if you have a 6'6" Rehoboth basement, can egress windows be put in there? You would not approve construction of egress windows?
They certainly can be put in. We're not going to stop you from spending your money not advisably.
Okay, thank you. Okay, they were my questions for the building inspector. Thank you.
You mentioned earlier that there is now a shed on the property.
Microphone.
I'm sorry, microphone, I'm sorry, Glenn. You mentioned earlier that there is a shed on the property.
Correct.
Which I assume, since it's not mentioned here, is not included in the gross floor area.
That is an assumption that I cannot make until I see further documentation.
Then my other question is, how can you, I mean, we know that the 6'6" basement, the Rehoboth basement, is free space, essentially. And theoretically, it's not supposed to be occupied space. One assumes it's for, mechanical stuff, storage and everything like that. But in reality, probably many of us here know that people are using it. How do you raise a basement and make it 7 foot, whatever they wanted to do? Then it counts in the gross floor area. So how can you have a height variance with not a gross floor, a GFA variant. I don't understand. That's what has confused me about this whole thing.
Yeah, you are correct.
Okay, so I am correct to be confused. Okay.
Right, and that is, it goes to the conclusion of
Right.
the report that they may need additional variance requests going forward. It's important to note that it's not just the height of the structure. As we begin to build this structure up, other things occur.
All of that
Lot
counts, the
coverages,
basement. Yeah.
maybe side setback variances, a couple host of other variances that may need be required for this construction.
Jan, further questions?
Can we introduce one number two?
So
go
very
ahead.
quickly, the question came up for the floor area ratio and what the impact this would have upon that. As I stated in my report, the current house is listed at 2,775 square feet of a maximum allowable of 3,030 square feet. From my calculation, from our lovely blue beam product that we have for measurement, what I have drawn out here is if the basement were to be a habitable square footage, it would be 1,402 square feet. Add that to the 2,775, you get a floor area ratio of 4,177 square feet, which is obviously, which is over the 60% allowable for this particular lot,
Plus the shed.
Which is the 330. Is that what you said?
which is the 30/30.
30/30.
30/30.
Right,
Right.
right.
Effectively 3,000.
So that's why, I guess, to all of you, to Barry and Fred, and that's why my question is, how can we grant, if we were even going to contemplate granting, a height to do something that will increase the FAR without, it doesn't-
We still have to go through the permitting process so we can be in compliance with the grant for the elevation gain. Matt is incorrect.
I mean, you could give them a height increase so they could build something taller on their house than currently exists, if you were inclined to do it, and they'd have a challenge of trying to justify why that's important, without granting them any additional FAR. I think the problem we have, which I didn't fully understand when we had this conversation, is that the applicants, I guess, have been asked to supply the parameters of what they want to support the FAR variance, and we don't have that information.
Correct. No additional information was received as to the layouts or the intent of use for those areas created.
For variance hearing, you would only need to supply information when you're asking for an exception, and we're willing to comply with everything except the building elevation. So it would be redundant to submit that information when we aren't asking for an exception.
So our challenge is to decipher what it is you want in the way of FAR. And if we take the calculations that were just done, then your challenge is to justify a desire for 4,177 square feet of gross floor area, right?
Yeah, but we aren't requesting that. We are requesting encroaching the elevation, the max elevation of the property by 1 foot, and we are not asking for, Matt is actually the one that recommended, and I don't even remember putting it into the request for variances because we don't need it. We are able to comply with FAR, and that's what our intention
We'll
is.
get that when we do the homeowner. Yep. So, go back to Janet. Any additional questions, Jan? Bill?
So to be clear on this mathematics, if they were to be allowed to raise their basement to the 7-foot level, they can only finish that 255 additional feet to give them the 3,050.
Correct.
3,030.
330, excuse me.
But, however, the space is still going to count against them as
Right.
floor area ratio.
But that was my question. That was
so that-
actually my question.
right,
So
and
so they're in violation the minute that they raise it.
Correct.
Right.
That was my question.
Well, we have a 1,000 square foot exception when we raise the structure.
You actually you cannot take advantage of that as the house was built over 50% of the lot coverage, or excuse me, the floor area ratio. So once you exceeded the original construction of 50%, that basement credit can no longer apply.
So what is the house?
Wait, but that, in our meeting, when we talked about this, Corey, you, and I are on the same page that the 1,000 square foot, we would be under the 50%.
Right.
You have calculated at 2,775.
Right, but FAR, even if we have to tear down the shed to get underneath of the square footage, we could still comply.
Can I interject? Clearly, there's not agreement there and there on what the numbers are right now, and so I think our recommendation would be to defer to next month so they can get on the same page and see what variances actually are required, and perhaps then submit an application. I'm sorry that puts you behind a little bit further, but you're not going to be able to get the numbers right sitting here doing it.
So, I do have one question. I just want to clarify what Mark
I
said.
think we waited 3 months to be here. I think we should have the opportunity to present our case. We are going to comply with FAR. We are asking for an exception to elevate. We are taking the liability of the floor to area ratio under ourselves. And that was our original intention.
Well, I mean, as a homeowner,
Well, we
can I
haven't
say
started
why
the
I'm
hearing
here?
Yeah, we haven't,
Okay.
we're finishing our
But, Matt, isn't it possible for them to raise the roof a foot without raising the floor of the first floor or the ceiling of the basement?
It absolutely is.
So is that's not what you want to do here today, right? I mean, you want to raise the ceiling of the basement. And in order to do
Make
that,
it habitable
To make it habitable
and to
space.
bring it up to a safe, habitable space.
Correct.
but we don't have the numbers.
You don't need them. We are willing to take the liability and apply for permitting in conformity. The only thing that we're asking for an exception for is the elevation gain. We still have to have our floor to area ratio verified by the permitting department before we raise the structure.
Well, I just want to let's address Glenn's point here. Do we want to defer, or do you want to continue to proceed?
Well, we could proceed and apply again. We waited 3 months.
You wouldn't be applying again, just so you
Right.
know. It'd be a continuation. There'd be
We
no additional
continue this.
fees.
Yeah, there wouldn't be 3 months.
Right.
It'd be on our calendar next month,
If we're meeting.
or whenever
Or
we meet next.
our next
I think
meeting?
my issue is we're asking, like, the FAR has, we did not even intend to put that. That was recommended that we ask for the exception.
Okay.
Our intentions are to comply with building code. Those are our intentions. We want to comply with floor to area ratio as the rules allow.
And then let me get back to Mark's question. So if you if it were approved, you lift the height, and that basement were to be unfinished at 7'10", or whatever it is,
Correct.
is that a trigger for the FAR?
Yes.
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 Anything,
Automatically in violation of the FAR the day you do
So
it.
the day you lift the
1402.
building as the foundation,
From the bottom.
the foundation exists today, that space, as soon as you cross,
Correct, but all we're asking for is the ability to lift it, and when we lift it, the additional variables have to conform.
Okay,
So
the-
we
see,
wouldn't need an exception.
The issue I have with that is an exceptional practical difficulty could be a financial hardship on the homeowner. You could be back here at a future Board of Adjustment saying, I just spent $200,000 lifting this house. That's a hardship on me. You need to give me this variance. So it's like, trying to prevent you from doing this. But let's get back to, we're going to continue. Let's get back to our questions to the building inspector. Jan, you're
Can I
finished? Bill?
clarify that item, just one more piece on that item.
Okay.
Is that, so I don't think we object to going forward on a height variance request, so long as the record's clear that, if the variance is granted and plans come in and he reviews the plans and it triggers the need for a FAR variance, the applicant will need to come back on a new application to receive a FAR variance from this board.
And my concern, Glenn, would be if you follow that thought, what if there's a 6-month wait? So, oh yeah, we jacked the house up, and now let's put the,
They won't be able to jack the house up.
No, we'll never issue a building permit if it violates. FAR.
Thank you,
If it
thank you.
violate- If FAR is violated, the permit will not be issued.
I feel like that this is essentially a waste of our time, because there's no way that you can grant a height variance for a basement that's going to be 7'10" that automatically goes into the FAR. We're essentially giving, it doesn't make any sense
Well,
to
if,
me. Am
if,
I
if the
being
board,
can
if the
illogical?
board
conform, we should
granted a
be
height
allowed to.
variance, if the
Hang on,
board
one-
granted
one-
a height variance,
Glenn.
and they came in with plans where the pitch of the roof was changed to, to exceed the height, and no additional floor area was triggered, we'd grant that permit because you granted a height variance. But if what's being proposed, as I understand the building official's position, is based upon what's being proposed, if the house was actually lifted, raised, there'd be additional gross floor area, which would trigger a floor area ratio, a need for a floor area ratio variance. So there is an instance where you could grant a height variance and you would never see this
Anything
applicant
is
again.
possible, right? Okay.
Matt, may I continue on? Is there not a regulation that that a first floor, the bottom rafter can only be so many feet above the street? Is it 3?
There is, it is, you are correct, it is 3 feet to
Would
the
not
bottom of
that
the
come
floor
into play
joist.
also?
It may. It
No,
may.
we are within that. We already had that checked if we raise the structure. Yeah.
We would meet that requirement.
Okay, so one other thing. Regarding the height variance only, is your justification for that, and I think that's what you just said, your justification for that is to create a habitable area in the basement.
Correct.
So I don't know how you can make the case
Because-
today on the height variance
Art,
if what you're proposing to do is non-compliant with FAR.
no, we would comply with the floor to area ratio.
But you
And
would- but you-
Pursuant to 270-21, Section B, paraphrase 1, it states that if any, shall not exceed 60% for the first 5,000 square feet of gross lot area. And then pursuant to that, that's where the height comes into play. Because we went over this with Matt and Corey, and we're very thorough, and we were told by both of them that we can make this change, which is exactly why we are here.
You can make this change.
Correct.
What change?
We could, within the FAR, we could be within the FAR.
With using the exception. And let's say we have to tear down the shed or make a modification, that's possible.
Well, I've just done the math on the shed. Your shed is shown as 12.4 by 10.2. I do the math and I say that's 126.48 square foot.
Correct,
So that's all.
correct.
And the proposed basement would be 1402. So it's not a.
When we submit the plans, the entire basement it would only be the 1,000 square foot credit that we would be obtaining. And the rest
But
would
Matt-
either be unfinished or.
But Matt has said that.
I think that we should defer, and I think that we should touch base with Corey and Matt and come back with a better presentation and a better understanding of things. And then if we need to, I think you guys were right. I think that's just the best decision at this point. I think
We're
that we're on
sorry
two separate
about
pages.
sitting
No, it's
through
okay.
the-
We've just been waiting for so long, and it's the builder set the building at a height where they intend to have a guest room. The house is full, like they're taking care of their parents. They have 3 kids, and we can't,
So we'll hear all that when we swear you and open the public hearing.
sorry for wanting to,
No. No.
I mean, we're really here, from my point of view, that I don't know what a Rehoboth basement is. I wasn't from this area before. When I worked with it, my understanding was I'd be able to have, it was listed as a basement on my contract. I talked to the builder about what I wanted. He said, we don't do aftermarket stuff, but you can absolutely contract to all the different contractors around here that do that. And then I went to do it properly through the permitting and everything else, and that's when I found out that at the height that they built it, I actually can't have a habitable basement. So that's what triggered this whole process, was to say, I have family that's going to use this. I want to make it compliant. I want to make it safe, smoke detectors, right, the whole thing. It's 1,500 square feet. I only need part of that for the extra room.
Did you build the house?
No.
We took over, Evergreen built it. I took over a contract that was existing. It was during COVID, so I didn't get to sort of make
Okay.
changes. But I did address it with the builder and ask those specific questions about doing the basement. They even showed me other homes that they had done and said, here's where this is going to go. They're going to put a TV here, and it was the same thing,
So
but they were higher than mine.
I do want, we've gone.
Anyway, so-
Without opening the public hearing, a lot further than we typically do. And I want you to understand that when you come back, you're going to have to start from scratch. Because
Sure.
we have to create a real record here. And we need
I
to
didn't
get.
mean to waste anyone's time. We thought we were sort of, we
didn't.
vetted this like for a while, trying to make sure we were all prepared.
Can I ask, do we not at least owe it to them to vote on the height requirement so they know whether they should go forward? If the height requirement is not approved, there's no point going
Well,
forward.
It's still, the additional to the shed, if we were
No,
to
I
take
was
the shed
directing that to
down,
the attorney.
the 250 foot of the porch is also excluded, so.
The problem is that, your criteria, I mean, I don't think they can win on, I don't think they can make their case on the height if their intention is to create FAR, which is non-compliant.
Agreed.
But I
And
agree.
that was.
Yeah, that was
my-
never our intention either.
Yeah, we are complying with floor to area ratio. We are well
But
aware
we
of
thought
that.
we had the 1,000 feet.
Right, but we're not so sure. We're not so sure about that. I
Okay.
mean, we understand that you
Yeah.
feel that way.
Yeah,
and-
that's the only reason we're here. Like, if we weren't told that we did, and whatever we have to do to comply is possible. The way that these houses are being constructed, we would be able to take advantage of that, but Evergreen did otherwise. So, I mean, 1,400 foot at 6'6" is just, what can you use that for? I mean, what amount of storage and what amount of utility? It's an entire floor of a house, which is why they purchased it. And that the builder was just unwilling to finish it, but said they could put bedrooms and
I
everything
think you're
down there.
incorrect. The builder wouldn't have been allowed to finish it. He never would have got a permit to finish it.
That's right.
No, correct, exactly, and that's exactly.
But
And
that's
neither
not,
can you.
I mean,
That's
my
exactly
contract
why
calls
we're
it a
here.
basement, right? I mean, all of that shouldn't be allowed, frankly, if it can't be a real habitable basement. You should use another word like a crawl space. It's, to have 1,500 square feet of quote-unquote storage is a huge waste for a homeowner
And
from what I
I
was looking
personally
for.
would love to have that space
This-
in my
the-
house.
Also, the city of Rehoboth does not have a basement minimum height. The only thing that they have is, it is section 270-21B subcategory C, which states that 6'6" is excluded in FAR, which is why the builder is doing this. So he's giving them that entire area and then they're using it illegally. I mean, that's what they're doing. Nobody's not using the
I mean,
1,400
I'm
square
here
foot
because I
under
don't
their
want to do
house.
that, right? Like, I'm here because I'm spending the money, the time,
We
because I
want to
want
add
to do it
egress.
right. I just
right.
want to be honest about that.
Okay, so at this point, whether it's a motion to have a
Defer.
continuance on this case?
Yeah, we should defer consideration of this application. And I'm sorry, I didn't understand that question better when it was raised originally. So
Do you need a motion to defer?
I think that's probably the
All
best
right,
thing.
I move that we defer consideration of this case for more information.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so
Thank you.
it's,
All right, we're not done with the meeting yet.
well, we're close.
We're close, yeah.
We generally meet every month, but we've got some scheduling challenges this coming December.
So the next meeting might be in January.
Mr. Miss,
Not on here, not on the survey.
Mr. and Mrs. Kelly. So we generally meet every month. But we have some scheduling challenges in December. We may not meet again until January.
That's fine.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. Okay. I think that,
We were going to talk about the time of meetings. Is that something, Barry, I might bring up?
We can talk about it.
we can talk about that. We can excuse the meeting,
Sure, yeah.
you know.
I'm sure, I just
The-
noticed
As
that
long as it's not 9 a.m.
even before we were on the committee, there were several instances where the meetings went 3 and 4 and 5 hours. And I'm wondering, since we closed the building at 5, if it might not be wise to start these at 2 or even before, if possible.
Yeah,
if
I would
everybody
need
agrees.
we would need to check with Ann as to what is scheduled here. Joe, I don't know if you know the schedule, yeah.
What do you all think? There's a suggested we move back to 2 o'clock so that we're not thrown out of the building at 5 o'clock if the building.
You have an issue with that.
I have
Idea.
another meeting that I
Okay,
get paid.
then I withdraw my,
Unlike this one, on a board that I'm on the same day. And so I have to drive, and we usually end by 12:30 or 1, and then I have to drive back down here. Now, I periodically can do it on Zoom, but.
Well, no, I'll withdraw that suggestion. I just want to know if anyone had a
And they moved their
conflict.
meeting to start at 10 instead of 11, so,
So we can talk to Ann about this, but this committee until a year or two ago met in the evenings.
in the evenings, yeah.
So I don't know that we should assume we'll be thrown out at 5:30, as much as we'd like to be thrown out. We,
Okay, thank you.
And do you stay with us?
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
With that, make a
Yeah, so
Anything else,
I
Frank?
I did not circulate the proposed amendments to the rules, and consequently, I don't think we can have a long discussion about that today, so that'll be on our
That'll be
agenda
Okay.
next
old-
time.
Old business, another time.
And with Matt, I had a couple of just really kind of housekeeping. Matt was going to get back to us about the updated application. And then the other thing I was going to ask, I asked Matt just, about a couple of cases when I first got on here. But could we periodically get updates about, like whatever happened, to this and whatever happened to that? Because we all walk around town, and I mean, I saw a structure that was approved, anyway, and nothing's ever happened to it, and I was curious. And is that something that the Board of Adjustment has done in the past, Barry? Is
Sounds
it-
like enforcement issues
No, it's
to
not
me.
enforcement, it's just curious, did they ever apply for the permit to build the pervious, thing around the
Not-
building?
not since
What
I've
would
been-
we do with that information? if we
No,
knew?
okay, so it doesn't matter to
So-
us what happens.
So there, variances that we grant do have an expiration on them if the permits are not pulled,
Yeah,
so they can die on the
Okay.
vine. if
What
they're-
is that timeline?
Well,
Do you know? I'm just asking.
our rules say 6 months from when they're granted, but it begs the question, if the applicant with the variance can't pull a permit until something else happens,
Right.
when does the 6 months start?
Sure.
So,
the planning commission used to have the same thing on partitions, 6 months and, and then you have to apply for an extension.
it used to be very simple. You'd either had a permit or you didn't, and you went in, and 10 minutes later, you knew. And
Right.
it's not that way anymore.
Harry, will the next meeting be the usual in January?
January
January
would
the
be,
4th?
yeah,
The
fourth
4th?
Monday, yep,
Not gonna
2:30.
do December?
Looks like we can't get a quorum.
I don't think we'll be able to get a quorum in December.
Okay.
Thank you, so
Okay.
I don't have to wait till December 20th to.
Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn if there's nothing else?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.